Hello and welcome to the fourth segment in our U.S. History Review. That's 4 segments of 15 minutes, and we've gone throughout the whole history of the United States, from the 13 colonies to the War on Terror. That's 1 hour. That's slightly over 1 class period, guys.
Wow, that's a lot of time, Mr. Simonetti.
My name is Mr. Simonetti. I'm on the right wearing the glasses.
And my name is Mr. Antinoro. I'm on the left, the inspiration for that famous show on TV.
Numbers were canceled way too soon, if you ask me, Mr. Antinoro.
I know. That's why I'm teaching social studies now.
Well, at least you got a job, because you know what? During the Great Depression, a lot of people were unemployed.
Yes, they were.
Now, tell me, Mr. Antinoro, why was the economy doing so poorly in the 1920s and 30s?
There were many underlying causes of the Great Depression. One, in the 1920s, a lot of people used credit excessively. Now, you probably know a lot of people like that.
My friend Fred doesn't understand the concept of credit, and as a result, he can't even lease a car. They won't let him lease a car. He'd have to pay like $300 extra a month.
Wow.
So he thought a credit card, he didn't realize that's money that you have to pay back.
So by the end of the 1920s, many people got themselves in a lot of trouble, and they could not pay back their loans. Also, by the 1920s, many products were being overproduced, especially farm products.
Now, didn't a lot of farmers start farming because they were enticed out west?
Yes. Actually, you bring up the Homestead Act, right?
I believe that's the act where you got free land, basically to build a home if you agreed to farm 5 years out west.
Exactly.
That must be the Homestead Act then.
Okay, and because farmers were overproducing thanks to the machines that they now had, prices were very low for their crops. Also, banks started to close.
Well, what happens with a bank? I've never heard of a bank closing before. You mean closing overnight so they could clean the bank and stuff? What do you mean by banks closing?
Well, banks actually failed. And you know what happened when banks failed if you had money in that bank?
Well, I would assume they're just holding the money for me, right? They're just a safe place to keep my money.
In fact, your savings would be entirely wiped out.
That's pretty messed up. So I'm putting my money in this bank, which I expect to hold on to the money in a safe place, and then they close and my money disappears?
Exactly.
Well, that's...
So because of all of these underlying causes, the market crashes. Okay, it's known as Black Tuesday, and that's the immediate cause of the Great Depression. Now, in the election of 1932, it's all about the economy.
Well, I mean, what did the president do during the Great Depression? He didn't try to fix it?
Well, Herbert Hoover, the Republican president during the Great Depression, or when the Great Depression first started, he believed that the economy would recover on its own. He believed in a lot of ways in laissez-faire. Leave the economy alone.
Hands off. I remember that from Global.
Wow. You remember a lot from Global.
I had Mr. Hubbs.
Oh, okay. That's why. And FDR was elected in 1932 because Americans did not believe in Hoover's philosophy that the economy would just recover on its own. They wanted the president to do something about the economy and make it better. So FDR promises Americans a New Deal.
What was this? Didn't James Brown promise people a New Deal?
Well, this is a new deal with the economy. He promises that he's going to create new agencies to help get out of the Depression. So he creates these alphabet agencies like the WPA, the CCC, the TVA, and these created many jobs for people, and they also were valuable projects like building roads, planting trees, building dams.
Isn't that similar to what Hitler did?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
But FDR was a much better leader than Hitler.
So yeah, we wouldn't compare FDR to Hitler.
Also, he created the FDIC. So now,
when I go to the bank, I always see that sticker in the window. It says FDIC approved.
Yes. And
what does that mean?
Well, that should make you feel very safe about that bank, because if the bank fails, you will be guaranteed your money back. The federal government insures your account, and you will get your money back, up to $250,000.
Do
you have that much money?
Well, in my case, I have to spread my money to a few bank accounts so that it's FDIC insured. Otherwise, I'd lose out on my money.
Because you have a lot more than $250,000.
Multiples.
Okay.
Multiples.
Well, I'm going to come to you for a loan next time.
Yeah, you couldn't afford my interest. Anyway, so every time I get my paycheck, Mr. Antinoro, I get this tax. I have no idea what it's called. It's called Social Security. What am I paying to make sure that I have the ability to talk to people, that I'm secure in my social skills?
No. Social Security means that will be a pension that will be given back to you someday when you retire.
So it's kind of like a bank account that the government holds for me, kind of like a savings account?
Yes, and then they use that money now to pay people who are retired and need the money.
But I heard Social Security might be running out.
Well, thanks to all the baby boomers retiring, Social Security is a little bit in danger, but we hope that the government fixes the problem and there'll be Social Security for us someday as well.
All right, so then, was the New Deal able to get us out of the Great Depression?
Well, that's what many people think, but in reality it was World War II that ended the Great Depression.
Wait, you're saying there was 2 world wars?
Yep, there was a World War II.
Oh my, what happened in this world war?
Well, at the beginning, the United States wanted to remain neutral. Now, do you remember whose idea was that?
I believe that was Washington.
Wow, you do remember the last lesson.
I do, and I also remember in World War I, we said we wanted to be neutral, but we were trading, and Germany got angry at us, so they sank the Lusitania.
Exactly. So Americans remembered how trading during wartime got us into World War I, so they tried to prevent us from trading with any countries when World War II broke out so that we would not get involved.
Well, but then clearly we got involved. We were talking about it, so what changed that we had to stop being neutral?
Well, the Nazis and the Japanese became so aggressive that we realized we needed to help out democratic countries. For example, we started lending and leasing weapons to Great Britain, and that was known as the Great Lend-Lease Act.
Well, what are some other democratic countries in this war? We only sold to Britain, there weren't others?
Well, eventually we would also give aid to the Soviet Union, which you know was not a democratic country.
No, they're not.
It was a communist country under the leadership of Stalin. But we realized that Hitler and the Nazis were such an evil enemy that we need to help out countries that are fighting them.
Wasn't France one of our big allies in World War I? They weren't involved in this war?
Well, Germany was so aggressive that they took over France.
You're telling me that Germany took over France?
Yes, they did.
That big, powerful country?
Yes, they did.
That's crazy. Germany could have took over the world.
Yes, they did. But FDR gave aid to Britain, and that helped protect Britain, so Britain never fell to the Nazis.
All right, then so if Britain was able to beat the Nazis, why did we get involved?
Well, we got involved at the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which led the U.S. to enter the war.
I thought that was just a movie. That was a true story?
Yep, it was. Well, the beginning part was true anyway.
I never actually watched the movie, Mr. Antinoro.
Okay. It was the beginning part of the attack is true.
So then what happened because of Pearl Harbor? That's when Japanese attacked us in Hawaii, right?
Yes, and when we entered the war now, it was a difficult war for our country to fight. We had to fight on 2 fronts, in Asia and in Europe. So you can imagine, right, how hard that must have been for our country.
Sounds pretty hard. I mean, that's dividing our military in half.
And the Japanese refused to surrender.
Well, that's their code, right? The Bushido, their fighting
that goes
code.
back to the samurai. You remember so much from Global, you probably remember.
Yes, I had Mr. Hubbs.
Yes. And the Japanese just refused to surrender. There would be the kamikaze pilots that would fly their planes into targets. And we feared that if we actually invaded Japan, we would have up to 1 million casualties.
So what did we do? How did we end the war?
Well, there was a secret project called the Manhattan Project.
It happened in New York City?
Yeah, well, yes, a lot of the studies were done in Columbia University in New York City. And Truman, found out, because he became president after FDR died, that we have the most powerful weapon now that was ever created by mankind.
You're saying my guns?
No, not exactly.
Well, what weapon is this?
Okay, this is the atomic bomb, which Truman then warned Japan twice to surrender. And he dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, on Hiroshima, and then on Nagasaki. And finally, the Japanese then did surrender to the United States.
Oh, well, that's great news then. The war is over. I mean, we probably live in a time of peace now and relaxed tension. We probably sipping cocktails and relaxing by the pools.
You're naive, Mr. Simonetti.
What do you mean I'm naive?
Do you really think there was peace throughout the world after World War II?
Or what country would we might be having conflict with?
Well, the Soviet Union, of course.
But I thought they were our allies in World War II.
They were. But towards the end of the war, the United States and the Soviet Union started to have tensions and rivalries. Do you know why they had tensions and rivalries?
Well, I know we're democratic and they're communist.
Yeah, so completely different forms of government. And the Cold War started especially because at the end of the war, the Soviet Union began to expand communism in Eastern Europe.
We're probably not happy about that. We probably want to see more countries be democratic.
Exactly.
So why do they call it the Cold War then?
Yes, and don't say because it's cold in Russia.
No, well, I know growing up in high school, they always called me the man who made the Cold War hot. I just never knew what it meant.
Now, Cold War means that there was no actual physical fighting. It was more a war of rivalries and tensions.
Cool. Were there any specific examples of how we were rivals?
Yes, there were. There was the space race, okay, where the Soviets first launched a satellite into outer space called Sputnik, and in return, the U.S. said we need to catch up, so we invested a lot in science and math.
Isn't that why we landed on the moon?
Exactly. And we also had the arms race, where when we built up a large amount of atomic weapons, then the Soviets built up a large amount of atomic weapons, and that led eventually to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the closest we ever came to nuclear war.
Oh wow! And that's right by Florida, Cuba.
Yes, it is.
So they almost had nuclear weapons.
Scary stuff. Nukes could have been 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
Is that why we don't trade with Cuba today? That's
Exactly.
why we have a blockade? Because they're communists?
Yes, they are.
I never knew. I just thought Cuban cigars were made of something illegal.
No. See, it's all coming together now.
So then, we're not still in the Cold War today, are we?
No. The Cold War ended, and the symbolic event, really, of the end of the Cold War was the Berlin Wall falling down. So the Soviet Union collapsed, which a lot of our presidents hoped would eventually happen. They believed in a policy of containment, that if we contained communism and kept it in check, eventually it would collapse, and we no longer live in the Cold War era.
But what event signified the end of the Cold War?
Oh, the fall of the Berlin Wall.
But didn't we go to war in Vietnam over communism?
Yeah, so this was like a proxy war. We fought wars in other countries like in Korea and in Vietnam to stop communism from spreading. Americans, many of them believed in the domino theory, that if one country falls, such as Vietnam, to communism, so will all the others. So we had presidents like LBJ and Richard Nixon that used the draft and really escalated conflicts in Vietnam.
The draft, that's a horrible thing, forcing people to go to war who don't want to go.
Yes, and especially that 18-year-olds could not vote or were not guaranteed the right to vote at this time. The draft was very, very unpopular and caused a lot of protests.
The president can't have that much power. I mean, that shouldn't be allowed.
Well, Congress then took the matter into their own hands and passed the War Powers Act, which basically took power away from the president, and if the president ever sends troops into conflict areas, Congress must approve within 60 days.
Then why do people say that Vietnam was like the only war we ever lost?
Well, because we pulled our troops out of Vietnam, and soon after that, communism spread to all of Vietnam. And communism remains in Vietnam to this day.
So who was president during Vietnam?
Lyndon Johnson, and then also Richard Nixon.
Oh, wow. Did LBJ do anything good? I mean, he got us involved in this horrible war. Hopefully he did something good at least.
Yes. LBJ created many programs under his Great Society program to fight poverty. He wanted to fight a war on poverty. Instead, though, he wound up fighting more of the war in Vietnam.
Oh, wow. And isn't the Great Society like the New Deal that created all these programs to help people?
Great connection, Mr. Simonetti.
Oh, so then what did Nixon do? I mean, I know that he got involved in Watergate, so Vietnam, Watergate, it sounds pretty awful.
Well, Nixon actually had a lot of achievements before the Watergate scandal, and the fact that he did lie to the American people about the war in Vietnam. Nixon visited communist China and the Soviet Union, for example, and that was détente. Now, détente, you probably don't know that word.
I try to live a very détente lifestyle. I try to stay relaxed and cool.
Oh,
and
so you do
easygoing.
know. Do you speak French?
Parlez-vous français?
Wow, I'm impressed.
You know.
And because he relaxed tensions with the Soviet Union, he signed the SALT agreement, which limited the number of nuclear missiles. Nixon also supported the 26th Amendment, which gave 18-year-olds the right to vote.
And there's only 27 amendments, so that's one of the last amendments.
Exactly.
So who was president after Nixon?
Well, you have Ronald Reagan, who I believe is one of your favorite presidents.
Didn't he cut taxes and believed it would trickle down like a champagne tower, and that money would flow from the rich all the way down to the poor?
Exactly. But because he cut taxes for the rich and increased military spending, we were in